Let's now start talking about the science of reps. And reps are pretty important in training. They're involved in every single training program, and they're going to influence a number of things: exercise selection, the number of sets we do, the training stimulus that you get out of it, and also the required rest period. So if we can get this right, we can do better programming for people. So let's get right into it. Now, as a general rule of thumb, these are good guidelines. They're not 100% accurate, but you know what? They're pretty damn good for influencing our training decisions, and we're going to find most of our decisions come here. Now, the bit of science research that basically contradicts that is that any rep range between 5 and 30 can be effective for hypertrophy as long as it's close and taken close to failure. So you got a close proximity to failure. That being said, 30 reps isn't really practical for a number of different exercises. So back squats of 30 reps or deadlifts would not be a practical thing for most people to do. And the amount of cumulative fatigue that can build up from that is quite high. So here are the general guidelines that you'll find will fit into most programs anyway. 1 to 3 reps will be maximal strength, and you'll generally do multi-joint exercises that allow for heavy loading, such as squats or deadlifts. You probably wouldn't do a leg extension or a single arm preacher curl because of the amount of strain in that particular joint. If the strain is distributed over multiple joints, it is generally easier to tolerate than the strain distributed over one joint. Easy rule of thumb. Now, 3 to 5 reps will do strength, which will combine load and technique with multi-joint movements. You generally find you still work with multi-joint here. For 6 to 8 reps, this used to be called functional hypertrophy, which is a good combination of strength and size. Now, they're all going to build strength, they're all going to build size, and generally that 6 to 8 rep range is probably the most beneficial range for most people to train in because we do get stronger and we do get bigger without having overall high amounts of fatigue. When we start going into higher reps, we see higher and higher fatigue. So for 6 to 8, you can also use isolated exercises very effectively in that range and get stronger with those. There's no risk factors there. 8 to 12 reps is hypertrophy. So again, as reps go higher, I start looking at more stable exercises or exercises that don't have as high a systemic load, because what will happen there is that fatigue will add up over time. And if anything over 15 reps, it's really machines and cables that we're going to look at to make sure that there's no limiting factors. So for example, you could squat 15 to 30 reps, but the limiting factor may not be the quads. It will end up being the cardiovascular system or the lower back core stability, for example, whereas in the leg press, we know the limiting factor will be the quads. Now, the choice of exercises should align with the repetition range. So high rep training, stable, low rep training, heavy loading. You really want to look at it like that. And that will give you a really good guideline to look at what exercise you should choose with what type of goal. So if I wanted to build my shoulders, for example, I might go high rep training on a lateral delt machine because that makes sense. I can get a really good shoulder pump with minimal joint strain. If I'm doing a set of 3 on lateral raises, generally my elbow, my wrist, and my shoulder joint are going to be the limiting factors there. So we need to be aware of that. So a couple of different ways that we can program reps. We can tailor the rep scheme based on the client's experience, goals, and adaptability. Now, all these are going to be in the programs in the course where you've got heaps of programs we're adding more constantly. So standard reps, assign a fixed number. This is really good for beginners. And also load-based programs. So provide clear, measurable targets. Limitation is it does not account for daily performance variations or fatigue. So some days when the client comes in, they could be feeling strong on top of the world and just crush it, and they can go higher and heavier. Some days they might feel like crap. So on the days they feel terrible and tired, they're not going to hit that rep range, which can be a little bit upsetting for a client. Now, the next one is a narrowly defined repetition range, 5 to 7, 10 to 12 reps. There's a little bit of flexibility and a little bit of volume regulation, but it may not accommodate significant performance drops, which could potentially reduce volume. Again, I'm pretty happy with this rep range. It's generally really good for intermediate lifters who need structure. I do prefer a wider rep range, like 6 to 10 or 8 to 12. That 4 reps seems to be okay. 2 is probably a little bit narrow. If I was going for strength goals, I would use a rep range of 2. If I was going for hypertrophy goals, I would use a rep range of 4. Now, the next one is reps in reserve or proximity failure. So with this one here, you'll set a target of how many reps shy of failure someone will do. So could you have done 2 reps more? Could you have done 3 reps more, 1 rep more, etc. So if done well, it can manage fatigue. It can allow for auto-regulated roll adjustments and supports progression really effectively. So here's a sample structure: 4 reps in reserve, 3 reps in reserve, 2 reps in reserve, 1 rep in reserve, go to failure, deload or recovery. Downside of this is people need to be able to pick their proximity to failure. And a lot of people, including PhDs, in the industry who teach people how to train for a living do not know how to effectively choose their proximity to failure. So for a lot of people, I don't actually use this as a guideline too much. Some coaches will say people are really good at doing that. I disagree entirely. So with that, I would not use this one too often until someone is like an intermediate to advanced lifter. And then one thing that I want to talk about, and that all the other principles we talk about really go into this, the execution of reps is as important as the number. So a lot of people will do arbitrary, you know, arbitrary reps. They won't have any kind of standardization, and they'll say they're getting stronger over time. There is a big difference in a rep done in certain range of motion and at a certain tempo to a different range of motion and a different tempo with the same weight. So if I just dropped 100 kilos on my chest and then bounced it back up and like just pushed like that with no real regard for tempo or form, you could say I've just pushed 100 kilos, but that's a very different lift to lowering a bench press for 3 seconds, pausing on the chest for 2, and then pushing up as explosively as I can. It's a very different training stimulus. And the range of motion makes a difference too. So generally what we want to try and think about in the gym is that we use the rep ranges to guide how fast we guide progressive overload. We use the form and how someone executes each rep as a guide of the effectiveness of their training. Okay, so you need to have effective training first before you have effective progressive overload. That is one of the most important things that I can actually tell you in training, that if you have proper effective form and technique, then you can have effective progressive overload.